Oh, here we go. Good evening. I'd like to call the April 1st, 2010 meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission to order. And as usual, we start with a Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to ask our immediate past chair, Mr. Ron Morazzini, to lead us in the pledge, please.
Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Morazzini. The first item on our agenda is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission. And I'd like to remind folks that are with us tonight, and welcome folks in the audience, I'd like to remind you that we ask that if you'd like to speak on an item that you fill out this buff-colored form. It's located at the entrance to the chambers, and if you could deliver that to Jennifer Schmidt, our clerk, she will bring that up to me. And I'd like to have those before the end of the staff reports for those particular items. So, and we also, for fairness and equity, we ask that folks speak no longer than 3 minutes, and we have a timer that will help you determine that time. We also ask that folks refrain from applause or cheering or outbursts of disagreement, just so that we have civil discourse here. So I'd like to just ask for that. And with no further ado, I don't have any items. I don't have any requests to speak on matters not on our agenda. So with that, we'll move to consideration and approval of the minutes from the March 18th, 2010 Planning Commission meeting. If there are no additions or questions, I'd call for a motion to approve. Anyone?
Madam Chairman, I so move.
Thank you, Mr. Morazzini. Moved by Mr. Morazzini. Second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Galvan. Seconded by Mr. Galvan. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, Ms. Blackburn is abstaining. I believe you're absent at the last meeting. Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to the approval of the agenda order. We have a request to continue items number 2, 5, and 9. If there are no other changes to the agenda order,
I believe 7 also, are we?
I believe we'll start the public hearing, and then there's a staff request that we immediately go into. We'll continue at that time when we get, I believe. That's, so are folks, I'd like a motion about the continued items, please. Anyone?
I'd like to make that motion that we continue items 2, 5, and 9 to the April 15th meeting.
I believe they have different time. Wait, let's see. Continue item to April 15th. Yep, you're right.
Then I'll second.
Thank you. Moved by Mr. Morazzini, seconded by Mr. Liebig. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We'll move on to correspondence and staff communications from the city planner. Mr. Ricola.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the Planning Commission, just a very brief report tonight. The City Council has not met since we last got together. Their next regularly scheduled meeting is April 14th. And just 2 pieces of correspondence tonight. The first one is on agenda item number 4. There's a letter from Caroline Reck on this item. And secondly, on agenda item number 6, the Burger King conditional use permit, there is a memo from Sandra White. So that concludes my brief presentation, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ricola.
Ms. Sandine,
yes?
Could I interrupt for 1 second? I'm sorry. When the 2 of the matters that were continued, I think it should be made clear that they were continued until the April 15th Planning Commission meeting.
Right. We actually had, Mr. Morazzini mentioned that.
Did he?
Yep. And when that,
All right,
I
sorry
just wanted to
about
make,
that.
no, that's
That's
okay.
a 2 for me tonight, Steve.
I'm glad you made sure we actually got that right, though, so thank you. And now we'll move on to disclosure of ex parte communications. And as we decided several years ago, if we've had communications outside of this public forum, that those we would share that information with public. So has anyone had communications on any of the items on our agenda this evening? Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a conversation with the applicant on item 8, the Bridge District Development Agreement.
Thank you. Anyone? Mr. Morazzini?
Yes, I also had a conversation with the applicant on item number 8, and several of the neighborhood people that are interested in item number 4.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Morazzini. Mr. Liebig?
I would also like to note that I had conversations with the owners of the property regarding agenda item number 8.
Anyone else? Okay. Well, that brings us to our consent agenda. We have items 1 and 3. Anyone have questions on those items, or is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, so moved the approval of the both agenda, consent agenda items.
Moved by Mr. Ledesma. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, Mr. Galvan, thank you. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 4. Thank you, Mr. Colsani, for being here. And we'll turn over to Ms. White for the staff report. And this is a status report on the public workshop conducted on commercial vehicle parking in rural and agricultural areas.
Good evening, Chairperson Sandine and members of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission directed staff to conduct a community meeting for the purpose of soliciting feedback from the community regarding the parking of commercial vehicles in the rural and agricultural areas. That meeting was held on March 9th in the Galleria, and it was attended by approximately 50 to 60 people. And the audience was asked to respond to a series of 5 questions, and I've summarized the results of those, and I'll just go over those with the Planning Commission. And the first question that was asked was, should there be a limit on the number of commercial vehicles that can be parked in rural and agricultural areas? And there was a request from the audience to split the question up into 2. So most of the audience indicated that there should be some limit on the number of vehicles parked in the rural RR and RE zones. Approximately half of the audience indicated that vehicles in the RR and RE zones should be limited to 3 to 5 vehicles, and approximately half of the audience indicated that 5 or more vehicles should be limited in the RR and RE zones. Nearly all of the audience indicated that 5 or more vehicles should be allowed in the A1 zone. The second question that was asked was, should the requirement of having commercial vehicles be garaged in RR and RE zones be retained? And nearly all of the audience indicated that the garaging requirement should be eliminated. The third question was, should commercial vehicles be screened from view from adjoining streets? Nearly all the audience indicated that they should not be screened. The fourth question that was asked was, should commercial vehicles be parked on a durable and dustless surface? The majority of the audience indicated that they should. And the fifth and last question was, should limits on hours of operation be introduced? And the majority of the audience indicated no. The audience was also given an opportunity to provide written and verbal comments, with exception to the weight restrictions. Some people that came out feel that the current regulations should be retained, with the exception of increasing the gross weight vehicle rate rating to exclude light-duty trucks, and also some individuals feel that trucks should be allowed to park on private property as long as neighbors and traffic are not being adversely impacted, and that if the city decides to make changes to the zoning regulations regarding commercial vehicles, take in consideration the cost that could possibly be incurred, for example, for providing a durable industrial surfaces, and also constructing garages. This concludes my presentation. We have tentatively scheduled to come back to the Planning Commission on May 6th, so that date might change, so that's why we're saying tentatively. Are there any questions of staff at this time?
Any questions of Ms. White? We have 2 requests to speak as well, and we're asked tonight to provide some direction to staff before they come back on May 6th. So any questions before I ask folks in the public to speak? All right, seeing none. The first speaker, the first slip I have is Paul Chavez, or Paul Chavez. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but
Everybody says it a little different.
I thought I could come up with 3 other ways to say it too.
That's fine.
Welcome.
Thank you. I attended that meeting that Ms. White, is that her? Yeah.
Yes,
was
Ms.
at,
White.
And what I found is that the majority, I'd say almost everybody there, was a truck driver or a family of a truck driver. So I think the questions and the responses are somewhat skewed. It didn't appear that the city informed any of the other residents of the area. So when you have the majority of the people voting, you had whole family blocks voting. And if everybody in there is a truck driver, of course, they don't want any regulations. They want to be able to park as many vehicles as they can on their lots. And so take that in mind also. I think the city needs to contact all the residents of these areas by letter, not by a little thing in the paper or some telephone pole message or something, but if you're going to change a regulation that's going to impact their people's environment out there, I think everybody needs to be contacted. And I think that it's on the city and their responsibility to contact these residents. So also, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. The parking regulations that they, currently, I moved out there and I was fine with the current regulations that are out there. I'm not quite sure why the city wants to go ahead and increase commercial truck vehicle parking out there. And also that they really need to define what a commercial truck vehicle is. My interpretation, and it seemed like the staff's were the fact that it's a large, basically a semi-truck and a 30 to 40-foot trailer. But at this meeting, there's a lot of confusion on what that is based on the gross vehicle weight. A lot of people were concerned that their utility vehicles, their pickup trucks were falling into that category, and they were upset, and I would be also too. But we've had these laws on the books for commercial truck parking out there, and why do we want to change it and increase it? This area is supposed to be a buffer between developments that are going to go in. They've been delayed because of the economy, but eventually they're going to go in. And here it seems like the city wants to come in and put a commercial truck lot in our rural and rural estates. Lots aren't all defined by the current definition of rural estates and rural residential zones. And so we have just a hodgepodge going on out there. And here the city wants to come in there and basically turn it into a truck lot and devalue our home values. Currently, it seems to work fine. So why I can't understand why the city wants to come in and change that. And so that's my feedback to the city.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And next I have a request to speak by Carolyn Reck.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Carolyn Reck, and I live in the Rural Estates Zone in Southport. After the March 9th workshop with the truckers, a local farmer came up to me and asked me why I moved to a rural location if I don't want a trucking operation across the street from my house. I let him know that he's been misinformed, that I wanted to move to a rural area because I grew up in a rural area. My background is in agriculture and would like to eventually farm my property. I further explained to this local farmer that I attended agricultural colleges and I've worked over 15 years in agricultural-related research and regulation and have continued to work for many more years as a professional biologist. I am very familiar with all kinds of agricultural operations and have lived on a farm in a rural area and have worked with farmers all over California. I understand what is entailed living on or near an agricultural operation. It appears there's been a lot of misinformation regarding the issue of commercial vehicles, and I mean semi-trucks, not people's pickup trucks, and rural residential and agricultural zones. My concern is not with those vehicles associated with agricultural operations or even those individuals who have a semi or one semi at their house and are not impacting their neighbors, the roads, or any other environmental factors. My concern is if the city amends the zoning to allow unrestricted commercial trucking operations in rural residential zones, it will destroy the quality of life in those areas, basically turning it into an industrial zone where people live. My other concern is that the city is not adequately notifying people of these proposed changes. The staff report mentioned that the city contacted me requesting names and addresses of people to be noticed. However, I feel it is not my responsibility to provide the city with that information. The city has a legal responsibility to notify people of proposed zoning amendments and anyone who will be impacted by these proposed zoning amendments. I also want to mention that the staff report mentions a petition that was submitted to the city. If one reads the full text of the petition, it appears to pertain to trucks, tractors, and farm equipment related to agricultural operations and country living. As written, I would have signed that petition. In summary, that petition really doesn't appear to pertain to the issues at hand here. And lastly, I respectfully request that Mr. Morosini recuse himself from the items related to the zoning amendment for commercial vehicles because he owns residential and residential properties and other businesses that may be affected by the proposed zoning amendment, which could possibly have a financial gain or loss to him and his family members. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rick. We have one additional request to speak, Linda Puumala.
Hello, my name is Linda Pumala, and I've lived in West Sacramento for over 35 years, long enough to remember when this was an unincorporated area. West Sacramento was the largest producer of the taxes in Yolo County for many years, and we saw our tax dollars going to Woodland and Davis for their community resources, and a lot of people here were offended by the fact that our money was going to the rest of the county and not being utilized here. So that was a part of the reason why we incorporated in West Sacramento. The economy has slowed down, and we have seen many lots that were bought up for redevelopment sit idle. We have seen many businesses close and many homes go into foreclosure. Our community tax dollars have shrunk. The Planning Commission is an integral part of our local government, and decisions made by this commission affects how the city government works and what resources come into the city. When deciding how to vote on this issue, remember that those trucks and trailer rigs represent sales taxes from property, business, property taxes, sales tax, gas taxes, and the business license, and the people that operate those businesses from their homes also are doing business in West Sacramento and providing income for other members of the community. They also are active in the schools, the sports programs, churches, and other social programs, all of which help to enrich the West Sacramento community. So please keep in mind that these vehicles are already there. The people that own them would have to look elsewhere to store their vehicles. And if they have to look elsewhere, what's to stop them from moving out of our community? And if they move out of our community, will they let their houses go into foreclosure if they don't own them? And what additional burdens will that place on our community? So please take all of this in consideration while you're making your decision on what to do in regards to this problem, since the vehicles are already there and the businesses are already in operation. This has been going on as long as I have lived in West Sacramento. People have been operating out of their homes and they're off of their lots. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to bring it now, there are no more requests to speak, back to the commission. Again, the staff's asked us to provide additional direction to pursue changes on this item. And as Ms. White mentioned, this is tentatively scheduled to come back to us as a public workshop on May 6th. So in advance of that, are there any questions of staff or items you'd like to bring to the staff's attention?
Madam Chairman, I have
Mr.
a
Morzini.
question. I think Ms. Reck's question regarding my participation is a fair question, and I'm sitting here and have been discussing this because I believe in previous situations where I live in a area that's zoned rural residential, and I have acted on a number of items where a specific zoning was included in property I might own. And it's been council's advice to me, for example, if I lived in a R1B zone, then that allegation or that question would say, could I not participate in any action that would have an impact on an R1B zoned property, so that's why I've been participating. And I know that there are several hundred rural residential, rural estate lots in Southport. And as far as any potential for financial gain, I wouldn't be an exclusive person to either gain or suffer loss by this. But I will go along with what council would recommend in this item.
May I just add, because we've all voted and deliberated on zoning ordinance issues that we live within those areas being affected. So I'm curious to what the answer would be to that as well. If it's a specific project, that has usually been the litmus test for when we recuse ourselves out of votes. So when it becomes the general ordinances and zoning actions, because we would be recusing ourselves out of just about everything, if that were the
I
case.
think those are all legitimate questions. It's difficult to give a specific answer tonight because I haven't actually had a chance to take a look at this particular one. There are exclusions. There's a public generally exclusion that applies when there's a large enough, when the decision that's before you affects a significant segment of the population. I would have to go back and get more information to know whether that applies in this particular case. And I think there's at least one other one, but I really would rather not speculate tonight. This is before you, not for any action, but for some direction to the Planning Commission. I'll have to leave it up to the individuals to decide whether they want to participate or not participate at this particular one. You know, I can certainly be prepared to give you an answer, a more specific answer at the next time this comes back at the workshop. Mr. Morosini, I wish I could give you a specific answer, but I don't know that I can.
Well, that leaves me to make up my own mind then, Jeff, or I think in the absence of a decision, I won't speak about this item until I hear back from you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morosini and Mr. Ledesma. Any other further, Mr. Liebig, comments for staff?
I just have comments for staff.
Okay, thank you.
That's it. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight, and I definitely appreciated the number of people that showed up at the meeting. I was here that night, and it was well-attended. I was not in the meeting. I was in a separate meeting. But as Mr. Chavez pointed out, and as the comments seem to point out, the majority of folks that were present were truck drivers, and the questions that were asked don't help us come to any consensus. I feel that we're in the same exact place we were at the last meeting. There were a couple of good points. As long as neighbors are not adversely impacted, that gets right to the heart of it. I do have a couple of specific questions, and again, Mr. Chavez brought this up. How do we define the trucks? I'm having a hard time imagining how much a truck weighs. I drive a tiny car that most people could probably pick up and move. So I really don't know how much trucks weigh. So it would be nice, it seems that the concern is for tractor-trailer trucks. We're not talking about large pickup trucks or utility vehicles. And the idea, I think, that we were getting at was to allow for the owner-operator to park his or her truck at their residence. As long as it doesn't, well, and this gets to the sequel and the environmental part, adversely affect the environment or cause harm to other people. Roads, I have concerns for the roads. It would be nice to get to some sort of consensus about the impacts on the road wear, noise, and the compatibility with the neighbors. And I didn't get that from the comments or from the polling of those that attended the meeting. I'm not sure if there was more that went on in the meeting to address the compatibility issues. That's what I would like to hear more about. And either Steve or Sandra, could you review how this was noticed? I know this is a general zoning ordinance topic, so I doubt we send out a message to the entire city What is our protocol on this, just for clarification?
You asked two specific questions. Let me answer the last one first. When it's a general zoning regulation that does not affect particular property, it's bound by one particular statute, does not require a specific notice to specific individuals or a notice to, well, as I indicated, to specific individuals. It's sent out, community-wide. What we did in this particular case, and Sandra can add to it, is we noticed the people who indicated they were interested in the meeting and then contacted individuals, including Ms. Reck, and asked if there were individuals she wanted to notice. But it is clearly not required to notice everyone in the community on a general regulation such as that.
And I would add that, remember that this is not, you're not being asked to take an action on this. The notice requirements that kick in under the government code apply to the public hearing that you are at least 2 meetings away from. You have this one tonight, it's coming back to you in a workshop format in May, and then if there is sufficient direction, it would come back for an action item sometime after that. That's the legally required notice. The city can always give more notice, and they have made an effort to notify community members in this case,
But even if it had been, I would add a public hearing on that. Our requirements would not be to notify everyone in Southport that lives in the rural residential, rural estate, or agricultural zone, and I'd be happy to share with that with the individuals who feel otherwise. With regard to the conduct of the meeting, given the fact that there was a large number of individuals present, it was staff's interpretation or decision to start the meeting with trying to make certain that all the people that were present would have some opportunity to speak either that evening, and given the large size, that was why we asked the 5 questions that we did. And I think part of the reason that we asked those particular questions is that those were issues that were discussed by the Planning Commission generally in the previous public workshop. So we wanted to get a basic indication, and it was not meant to be a scientific vote, but to allow all the people who are present some opportunity to speak, because as we all know, some people do not feel comfortable speaking in a public forum, and we wanted to provide that opportunity. In terms of other comments that were made, there was also an opportunity that evening for individuals, and several individuals spoke several times, to express their thoughts on the issue. And several people did, and Ms. White's report summarizes the majority of those comments that were made. It was also identified at the meeting that if you're not happy with either of those forums, that you please allow us, because this issue will continue, to make comments directly to staff. So in answer to your question, Commissioner Liebig, there was at least 3 forums for doing it. The first forum was not meant to be scientific, a poll in any way, but to allow sort of an indication of how that assembled group felt that evening. So does that answer your question, or
Yes,
can
it
I
does.
elaborate a little bit more on it? Okay, great.
And I think that actually sums up all of my comments as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
great, thank you.
Mr. Galvan. So it looks like, okay, Mr. Ledesma.
Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't
No problem.
stick my neck out there sooner. Some of my comments, just for directional purposes on how we proceed on this, it's just, and just looking at the agenda and looking at the comments, I'm tending to agree with Mr. Liebig on just, I suspect that through trying to, manage the meeting and get to some meaty questions, I think at the workshop, at least I tried to articulate some of the same things about the scope of this. We have an existing ordinance, and we have existing laws around kind of how this is managed, and what's being contemplated is a change to clarify those. And some of the issues that we brought up at the commission meetings, I brought up, were the ones that Mr. Lieber brought up. At scope-wise, I'm talking about semi-trucks and large trucks. So I just want to make sure that we are clearly trying to articulate that. I know we're not taking a vote on this, but it just doesn't seem, we just have to be clear on that, because that's what we're talking about. At least I'm talking about. If there's some other element out there saying that it's something else, or there's some other mission to include those in, I am not aware of it. And so I just need to make sure that as we communicate this at the workshop, let's be crystal clear on what we're attempting to do. Let's be crystal clear on what it is we're trying to manage. We are not saying no to commercial vehicles that are essential to agricultural business. We're not saying no to owned semi-trucks. We're not saying that. But there is a scope that we're trying to manage within and trying to clarify. And I just think having these definitions, making sure we're clear on what we're talking about, so that as we go to actually deliberate this, there's no, wiggle room. At least there's nowhere for us to go. And that if we make a decision or we contemplate in a workshop, that 2 weeks later in the hearing that we're hearing about, well, that could include this or that. I thought I was clear on all I'm talking about are semi-trucks. And all we are trying to prohibit at a very high level were the ability for any property to start accumulating those to where it becomes a truck yard. And that's what we're trying to prevent, because truck yards, by the very nature of them, shouldn't be out there. And so I'm looking at even some of the questions and the way they're phrased. It concerned me because it's sort of how many, if you just read them on the surface as I did, it does give a certain sense that we are opening the door to letting a large amount of trucks out there. How many should it be? 3 to 5, 5 or more? And I think by the definition of a truck yard, it comes to a point where at a certain point it becomes a trunk yard. So again, I just worry about how we're phrasing this and maybe contributing to maybe some of the misconceptions about what we're trying to do. So again, I'm just looking for some clarity around scope, around definitions, to make sure we're all clear what we're talking about. That's my only comment.
Just one response to that. The question on the number of trucks, admittedly, was an issue that may evoke a reaction. We were searching for some way to get an indication, however, from the assembled group that evening as what was a reasonable standard. On the surface, it may appear that it was being suggested that many trucks, tractor trailers, could be allowed on a site. That wasn't necessarily our intent, but the intent is to get an indication of how the people felt and what that attended as to how many trucks would be a possibility. That does not necessarily in any mean that that's the direction that we'll go forward, but certainly that information will be used in some way when we come back to you on the 6th. We were searching for ways, and that was the question we asked. And
I understand, and I'm not being critical. I'm just saying we need to be careful of the language, because it is apparent that maybe there is some perception that we're looking to regulate other things, and we're not. At least not my view. And that's what I thought I heard at the
and
workshop.
that was another point that I didn't address. That was a question that came up and was in the minds of many of the people that night. What type of vehicles are we regulating? Are they double wheelies, or are we looking at recreational vehicles, et cetera, and so forth? And from the comments that have been made in previous workshops and the code enforcement action and stuff, I think the Planning Commission has made it fairly clear that their intent is looking at semi-truck and trailers and cabs. But it's still one of the issues that it's out in the community and there's misinformation on it, and it's important to clarify that.
Thank you. And just to sum up, I've heard requests for clarity regarding rational scope and definitions regarding the regulation, and then also focus about compatibility. For Mr. Liebig, you mentioned compatibility, and then also just a concern about noticing. And Mr. Mitchell has shared with us a legal requirement, so that's just something that it sounds like some folks on the commission want to make sure that folks are noticed. So that's a summary of the discussion. Any other feedback for staff before we move on to the next item?
Madam Chairman, I just want to make sure that we do get some sort of ruling on my ability
Right, and
to
of
participate
course. Yep.
before that meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, you'll do that, correct? Yes. Thank you very much. All right, that was the status report on the public workshop, which will be coming up again tentatively scheduled on May 6th. And item number 5 has been continued to April 15th, so that moves us on to item number 6, which is a conditional use permit for a Burger King on West Capitol. And we're moving this into a public hearing, and Ms. White, you are the staff person. Thank you.
The applicant is seeking approval of a conditional use permit for a Burger King drive-through fast food restaurant at 4750 West Capitol Avenue. The project site is approximately .625 acres, and it is zoned highway service commercial. All other findings can be made for recommending approval of this request, and staff is recommending that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing, certify that the Planning Commission has determined that the mitigated negative declaration is the appropriate level of environmental review under CEQA, and finds that the mitigated negative declaration represents the independent judgment of the city, approve the requested conditional use permit subject to the findings and conditions as identified in the staff report, and approve the mitigation monitoring plan.
Thank you. And we don't have an applicant here to speak
I don't see the
tonight?
applicant here this evening. I don't know.
Okay. All right, so we have it before us. We're open as a public hearing. I don't have any requests to speak from the public, so I'll bring it to the commission for deliberation.
Madam Chairman, I had a couple questions.
All right, Mr. Morazzini?
Sandra, in the staff report, says something about the city engineer recommending that landscape planted on the planters along the west side be maintained no greater than 3 feet. Is there some sort of a visual problem there with traffic? Is
He was
it, that's
just-
right along the drive-through,
He
isn't
just wants to be sure or assure that the traffic come out of that driveway won't have their vision impaired or obstructed, I'm sorry. So that's why he recommended that the landscaping be maintained at no higher than 3 feet. And you
Okay,
should have
and-
received a memo from me clarifying that condition.
Okay, so to the extent that it doesn't impair, but does that mean then, if you were to look at like attachment 3, it shows the cars lined up there, and there would be no safety hazard, I wouldn't think, from other traffic until you get out of that stacked area.
We're talking about the driveway that provides direct access to the drive-through, not the driveway off of West Capitol.
Okay, I'm kind of trying to orient myself north, south, east, and west, and it talks about the west property line.
Yes, it's the driveway along the west side of the, coming off of West Capitol, it'll be that driveway. You following me?
Okay, you're talking about
Okay.
access onto West Capitol Avenue on the west side?
Okay, if you, coming off of West Capitol, you would turn into
Okay.
that driveway. That's the
I
main
follow you.
driveway.
I follow you
Yes.
there. But
And so-
there are vision impairment standards anyway that.
Yes, there
That
are.
wouldn't even need to be stated.
Yes, at the
would it?
driveway there are,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, I was thinking along the drive-through along that
Oh,
west
okay.
property line.
No,
Okay, thank
okay.
you for
Okay.
clarifying that. A couple other questions. Some of the improvements are going to be on the hotel
That's correct.
property. Is this going to, we're not planning on a PUD here. Don't we normally have a PUD when you're kind of, it seems like you're almost like trying to merge these properties. Is that not the case? Because it would seem like
These
the
are all,
improvements would be on, that serve this property would be on this property unless there was some sort of joint use, like
there is a condition requiring.
common
there is
driveway or something?
The engineering division is requiring that easements be provided for any improvements that are going to be provided off-site to serve this particular piece of property.
So the city can be requiring an uninvolved party, the hotel?
All the 3 parcels, the hotel piece, the drive-through restaurant, and the adjoining piece, the Valera gas station, they're all owned by the same.
All owned by the same?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that would run with the property then if those properties are
correct.
sold? Okay.
That's right.
Sandra,
Alright.
could you repeat that? I'm sorry. The Valero property,
There's a gas station
Yes.
on the west side, and then there's a drive-through restaurant, and then you have the hotel parcel that's located immediately east and north. The hotel parcel is a large site, so the same property owner owns all three.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Okay, that satisfies my questions. Thank you.
Mr. Lieber, do you have any additional questions?
No, just a comment. I appreciate the complexity of this one. It's an awkward interchange. I've now driven past it several times just to make sure that this isn't going to back up traffic or cause issues. And again, we're focusing on the drive-through only. That's all we're looking at. So beyond just caution of the interchange, the complexities caused by the median and the use of easements for the traffic coming in and truck traffic coming out of two parcels. No, I have no real other questions or comments.
Mr. Galvin, any? Okay. Any other commissioners have questions, concerns? Is there a motion or for an action? Close the public hearing, or I guess, there, keep it open till the action.
Yeah, before anyone makes a motion, I think it is maybe a little bit important on condition number 7 that be clarified, that just within the visibility of the access to West Capitol, to limit the vegetation to 36 inches, because it's kind of implying it along that whole west property line.
Did you see
Landscaping
this?
pl-
Did you see this?
That's included in your handout, right?
That satisfied?
Right, but that's not, this is implying that that attachment shows a line of vegetation running the whole west property line that blocks or separates the drive-through from the gas station. And I think the way it's stated, the condition, even the revision, implies that none of that vegetation could be higher than 36 inches. And I think what you're really trying to do, what the city engineer is trying to do is not block off the vision for getting on and off of West Capitol Avenue.
So it'd be more clear to say that any vegetation within the vision triangle adjacent to
that
the
would work
driveway
perfectly,
should be
yes.
limited to no higher than 36 inches. Is that-
Or else just eliminate the condition completely and go by the city standards for, because they wouldn't be allowed to do that anyway, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. But if you want to just modify it within that visibility triangle, that's fine.
Are you moving approval with that addition?
Yeah, I would move approval with that change.
A motion by Mr. Morzini with the amended item. Second, anyone? A second by Mr. Galvin. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to item number 7, which is a public hearing on Bridge District Riverfront Tentative Subdivision Map number 4983. We have no request to speak. We've been asked to open the public hearing and then I'll ask for a motion to continue it until April 15th, 2010. Is there a motion for continuance?
Madam Chair, I'll make the motion to continue.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin. Motion to continue. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Ledesma. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we'll move on to item number 8, which is a public hearing on development agreement between Bridge District Riverfront LLC and the City of West Sacramento. Welcome, Mr. Bermudez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before you tonight is a public hearing for the Bridge District Riverfront LLC Development Agreement. And this agreement, one second, we're trying to get the PowerPoint up. This agreement is between the city and the Unger family, which is part of the LLC formation of this group. And this agreement covers property within the Bridge District specific plan area, as you see there in the vicinity map. It's approximately about 15 acres in total land area. It includes also the main portion of the Grand Plaza for the Grand Street down to a connection to Riverwalk Promenade. For sake of just a quick background, as most of you are aware, the Bridge District is a planned urban transit-oriented development or district with roughly about 12 million square feet of commercial residential development planned for this area. And spearheading this redevelopment was the award of $23.1 million in a Prop 1C grant and an additional $1 million in a Prop 1B award for 2014 improvements. And these awards help generate the synergy for planning and urban scale TOD, and also help facilitate a public and private partnership with the city, with key Bridge District property owners in the city. Forming this partnership led to and helped with an update to the prior specific plan and created additional policy objectives that are part of a comprehensive specific plan that is known as the Bridge District Specific Plan that the Commission is familiar with in the various volumes of that plan. This agreement has been crafted to incorporate the provisions and conditions and tasks not included in the Bridge District Specific Plan or the CFD 27 formation documents. And most of the Commission is familiar with the Fulcrum or the Smart Growth Investment Development Agreement. This agreement is very similar to that particular agreement. There are a couple of noticeable differences, and I'll touch on that real quick towards the end of the presentation. The term for this particular development agreement is 17 years and includes vesting in existing land use regulations for the riverfront baseline entitlements until May 2040. The UNGRs are vested in the baseline block entitlements for the subject property, which in total for the baseline is $9.6 million for the entire district. The UNGR share of this development is 347 dwelling units and approximately 599,000 square feet of commercial development. Property owners are permitted to transfer unused riverfront baseline entitlements in accordance with the provisions in Volume 3. If the owner develops all parcels in a block owned by landowners at an overall density that is below the allotted riverfront baseline entitlement for that block, the city shall deposit excess in a density bank that would be subject to the city's discretion to transfer that within the waterfront area or transfer it to other parts of the neighborhood in the Bridge District. Any excess development potential will again be deposited into the density bank, and this is controlled by the city. Property owners can request additional entitlement and may require additional further review in regards to the environmental document. Just to note that the $9.6 million was evaluated in the supplemental EIR, so any further increase in different entitlement as a higher amount would require possibly an addendum or some type of supplemental work within the environmental document. Agreements to use all tax increment from this particular agreement generated from the Bridge District Specific Plan are to fund backbone and supplemental improvements. This would be for the reinvestment of the tax increment. And it's mandatory that this reinvestment of tax increment go to fund some portions of the streetcar, and which is a critical piece of the circulation element of the district. In addition, the landowners acknowledge that the backbone improvements cannot be completed without additional funding from the landowners from other landowners in the district. Landowners shall participate in CFD 27 to fund a portion of the backbone improvements that are called out in the district's financing plan and part of the Prop 1C grant funding. CFD election is scheduled for May or June, and payment of CFD special taxes will relieve the property owners from obligation of paying any specific city impact fees. Property owners requested that the city amend existing land use regulations and development standards to reflect more of the urban policies and standards that would be developed within this district. And the city needs to process this request within 6 months of the effective date of the agreement. In regards to two of the differences that I mentioned earlier in this agreement to the prior for the Bridge District that you recently approved. The city, as you notice in the red circles, those are key park elements and programming. One is Riverwalk Promenade, and the other is Grand Street Plaza. Critical to this piece is, that happens in this case with this particular property owner, is that all this area is under their particular property, so it makes it easier to work with the individual property owner. So in that case, the city is entering into a 10-year city option agreement to purchase property for the Grand Street Plaza. And as I mentioned, the owners are the sole owners of the land which the plaza would be located. And the option agreement is not included in your development agreement, but will be presented at City Council when we take it up for a public hearing. In addition, the DA references a purchase and sale agreement for dedication of land that's necessary to construct Riverwalk Promenade. And this PSA is needed for site control due to time sensitivity with Riverwalk Phase 5A agreement and the need to secure all the parcels for quickly for redesign improvements. In conclusion, staff is recommending that you adopt Resolution 1002 PC and forward this particular agreement to the City Council. And if it is approved tonight, the staff is scheduling this development agreement for a public hearing with the City Council on April 14th. And the developer, I believe, or property owner is here. I'm not sure if they're scheduled to speak, but at this time.
Thank you. We do have a request to speak by a representative from the applicant, but before I ask Mr. Harrington to come up to speak, are there any questions of Mr. Bermudez at this time? All right, okay.
Sorry, I
Mr.
have a
Libby?
question that can probably be gotten out of the way early on. On page 29, section 19, annual review of agreement. Review
Excuse
date.
me, what page number?
Page 29, number or section 19, specifically I'm looking at 19.1. Give you a second. The annual review date, it says when it commences, so it begins within 12 months from the effective date of this agreement through, is this forever? Does this go, is there an end date?
It's for the term of the development agreement.
And what is the term of the development agreement?
17 years for the bulk of the development agreement and an additional 40.
The
other way.
Yeah.
2040 for the vesting of baseline entitlement, and 2027 for the bulk of the development agreement.
Which brings up another point then. The facilities that are being provided by the applicant and leased to the city at no charge, do those expire at the termination of the development agreement?
I'm not sure what facilities are being provided. The property owner is dedicating land.
Property owner is also leasing restroom
Oh,
facilities along the plaza?
The staging area, that is for, I believe, a
No,
period
no.
of 16 months.
Restroom facilities along the plaza in one of the applicant's buildings will be leased.
Okay, you're talking about the restroom on the plaza?
Yes. Does that expire?
No, that does, I do not believe that expires. I believe that is a that's a provision that will continue. It's also provided in the specific plan that there will be public restrooms on the plaza.
Okay, so that does continue. And then the Business District 27 also continues. Okay,
Yeah, CFD 27 is a separately formed financing district.
okay, thank you for the clarification.
Any other clarifying questions before the applicant presents to us? All right. Mr. Harrington?
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Greg Harrington with the Bridge District Riverfront LLC. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. I don't have a formal presentation or anything. I think staff did an excellent job putting the staff report together. We've been working on this development agreement for what seems like years, and in the staff report, it was interesting to see the list of major accomplishments that the city staff, council members, commissioners, and the owners have made. It's amazing to look at the list, and we're proud to have property in this area and look forward to getting the Prop 1C housing built as quickly as possible. We're going through exercises right now of planning and seeing what actually is feasible, and we're excited to be at a stage where we can actually look at those type of things. I can't really say enough. I think the first DA that came before you, Mark Friedman's DA, really paved the way for not only the Ungers but the rest of the owners as we come forward. 90% of this document was done in a very good way, and we had pre-agreement before we even came in the door. So it made this a pretty smooth process. We do have a few areas that are specific to the property, and if you have any questions about those, I'd be more than happy to answer those. But I think they do wonderful things for the city, for the general public, and for the district. So we're looking forward to hopefully approval. Please no April Fool's jokes. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Any questions, though, of the applicant before we bring it back for deliberation? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission. In terms of April Fool's jokes, too, I think we just need to change the chair. The Planning Commission resolution needs to be from me instead of from Mr. Morazzini. I
Well,
caught
if you
that.
insist.
That's the only change I have. Any other comments, questions?
I have a
or-
couple of questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Morazzini.
And first of all, I want to compliment Jim and Katie. Katie's not here, but I know that they've worked as a team on this thing. And these are probably not the funnest part of your job, is wordsmithing all this stuff in these agreements and trying to come to terms. But I would like to compliment staff for the work that they've done on this. I do have a couple questions on, first of all, on page 22, these are really minor. 11.4.2.3 talks about the landlord shall dedicate at no cost to the city a public utilities easement within this corridor, and city shall install at no cost to landowner sewer and water main lines sufficient to serve adjacent development. And that implies that the city has some responsibility for construction activity here, and I didn't think that we were involved in that on this project. Page 22, second paragraph.
I'm sorry, which page?
It's page 22, I believe it's 11.4.2.3. It starts, city shall construct.
Yes.
So your question is that correct?
Regarding the city shall install at no cost to landowner sewer and water line sufficient to serve adjacent development, and
Yes, that is the negotiated deal point in this particular transaction, that the city's going to be putting in, as I understand it, putting in the public utilities, and that we are going to make that available and put in the utilities to serve the landowner's property as well on that particular Universal Street, which is the State Street Universal Street.
now why would the city agree to install substructure if it's not a part of the development?
Commissioner, I think I can answer that. This is, it's actually funded by Prop 1C, so it's not really at the city's cost. It's being funded by the total financing program that is jointly funded by Prop 1C grant, the Community Facilities District that the owners are placing on their property, and other grant funds that we have available.
Okay, that makes better sense. All right, thank you, Les. And then the other question, kind of related to that, on page 32, the under 23 miscellaneous, the prevailing wages. I'm understanding this to just be text that indicates that when the law requires prevailing wages be paid, that the developer and the subs would agree that there's no special arrangement that prevailing wage has been negotiated as part of this contract. Is that correct?
There has not been.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments, or motions?
I have
Okay, Mr. Liebig.
I have a couple comments. Well, first, I'd like to mention that I am also very excited that this is moving forward, and I'm excited, even though it's kind of a hassle, that the road I travel on daily is currently being ripped up. I'd like to see more of that this spring and summer and through the next year as well. So I do have one question for staff. What department or who in the city has the authority to, under section 6.1.5, to transfer density entitlements from the density bank? The excess entitlements go into that. The city has the authority to, or the city shall decide whether or not those will be transferred. Who is that, or what department, or?
That would be the city manager.
The city
Our
manager does
designee.
that?
Yeah.
Okay. And I understand that this is the same condition that was granted to Fulcrum's property. I just want to make a statement and stress primarily to, I guess it would be to the city manager then, that density was discussed within this body, and density restrictions were the primary reason given for waiving the height restrictions. So I would urge staff to use, I guess, discretion when granting the transfer of entitlements, partly because of our previous discussions up here that we didn't want to see, for example, a wall of buildings along the riverfront. And I don't think that will happen. However, I do want to stress that to city staff. That was it. Thank you.
And Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you, and I will say as well, this is an exciting development for our city, and thank staff for all their work. I know they worked very hard on all of these Bridge District projects, and we've been working on them and looking at them for a few years. So I'm excited to see this continuing, and with that, I will make the motion to adopt Resolution 10-02 PC. And I think that's all I need to make the motion for. There's no other resolutions or changes, right?
Nope, just the
So
correction of the name of the chair
I make the
on
motion.
resolution. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Seconded by Mr. Liebig. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thanks,
you.
staff. Thanks, applicant. Item number 9 has been continued to April 15th, so we'll move on to item number 10, which is a presentation on the draft climate action plan.
You know, you lost your audience, Steve.
Yeah, great crowd. This must be a really controversial item. Good evening again. I'm back, and I'm here really to kind of, hopefully you've had the opportunity now to do some reading in the evolving document, certainly more, hoping to get some more questions and direction and so forth. Basically, this is a workshop on the climate action plan, which is being slowly created as a draft, and the commission have been out kind of sharing the structure of this thing as it's begun to be constructed with the various commissions. Been to EDAC, I've been to Natural Resources, been to the Youth Commission, and Planning Commission once before. And so now we'll just kind of walk through the document and see if you have any questions or suggestions regarding any of the pieces of it. Again, climate action plans in general are something that is a very evolving area of policy within the last 5 years. It's been recommended by the Attorney General, the Governor, and the Air Resources Board that cities need to do their fair share to address global warming and climate action, greenhouse gas emissions, and has been evolving that the climate action plan is sort of the way to do that. That's being generally developed. Sac County has a draft plan. Davis has a plan. A number of the Sacramento County cities are working together, and we do meet with them regularly to share information and complaints and hopefully sources. Again, you at least now have a preliminary plan in front of you. It is a very preliminary plan. It's been evolving over probably the last 4 months, and probably has another 3 months to evolve before it's actually a public draft plan. Going through the sections, there's what I call Chapter 0, which is sort of the housekeeping stuff. At the beginning, there's an obligatory letter from the mayor saying how important this is. A table of contents, which will certainly begin to fill out in more depth now that I have the structure coming. An executive summary, which again is fairly incomplete because the document it's summarizing is fairly incomplete. Some information on ICLEI, which is the organization that's sort of the International Council for Local Environmental Action, and it's sort of coordinating sort of the source document for kind of the format and the approach and a lot of the analysis that is being followed to do this. It's also just from another plan, kind of 10 simple steps for each individual who can, what can you do at home to help reduce your carbon footprint. And then acknowledgement, not quite as many acronyms and abbreviations, and this is some of the things we deal with, but there are a few. And so those are summarized, and then there will be a list of tables and figures developed as those begin to get fleshed out. Chapter 1 is kind of the background on the science. Is there global warming? Why do we know there's global warming? What is it? What are the implications of it? What are the legislative context? Some of the actions of the governor, the legislature, state agencies, and so forth are summarized. This section, this chapter, is fairly well long. It may expand somewhat. I have a few other things I want to put in it, but generally it's pretty much where it's going to be. It was the easiest chapter to kind of steal whole cloth from other documents because it's really talking about the global level of the world in California. Chapter 2, this is the emissions inventory, where we generally considered this the first step for cities to, the Climate Action Plan is to figure out what you're doing. Last year, we did a inventory, sort of a municipal inventory, an inventory of what kinds of carbon emissions the city organization puts out. And this year, in 2009, we did a community inventory, which was basically what is West Sacramento, all of its businesses, all of its residents, what do we generate in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. The inventory is, at the community level, fairly simplistic. It's based on, so it's done with some software that ICLEI provides, where basically we can put in, for example, I can get from PG&E how much electricity did residents in West Sacramento use in 2007, and put that into the software. It looks up and actually goes to a very specific PG&E gas, greenhouse gas generation per kilowatt hour that varies from year to year. As you get a wet year, there's more hydro available. They can use more hydro. You get a dry year, then they have to use more of their peaker plants or their gas-fired plants. And so it does vary from year to year, and hopefully one of the major ways we will accomplish reductions is, in fact, by their changing their mix of renewable energy sources in electricity that they provide. The emission targets, the municipal is of 15% below the current level, is fairly consistent with the Air Resources Board scoping plan suggestion for cities. The community goal that I'm proposing would be 30% below business as usual by 2020. By it's probably not a huge issue by 2020, but for example, by 2050, we will have at least doubled again in population and employment, and that's not true for most of the cities in the state or the state as a whole. So because we're growing much faster, if we stick to a kind of specific reduction like 15% below the current level, that's just going to be very, very hard for us to do, and at the same time, when we're doubling in population and employment. And certainly one could look at it and say, well, you just shouldn't double in population and employment, but I think we all realize that, in fact, that development happening here in West Sacramento, tight into the downtown of Sacramento with the kinds of development as you've just approved here tonight, urban, smart, very efficient, that kind of development is extremely more efficient in terms of reducing greenhouse gases than a single-family home, a sprawl subdivision in Elk Grove or somewhere else. The chapter itself is largely complete from content. I do hope to put some more graphics to kind of show the relationship between the target levels and the business as usual graphs, et cetera. If you tab a few graphs here from it, community emissions, transportation sector, as you can see, is clearly the biggest sector by far. Commercial and industrial. One of the interesting things regarding this community is typically commercial, industrial, and residential are about even in most of the communities in the region. And you can see here, our commercial industrial is considerably larger, 24% of the total compared to 15. When we do initial, a lot of the comparisons that are typically used are per capita for a city. And so there's per capita for the city compared to the other cities in the region. And as you can see, compared to most of the cities, we're fairly high. Not compared to the county unincorporated or the total for Sacramento County, but we're on the taller end. But I realize that per capita comparison really isn't fair to this city because of our large employment base. Going the right direction. So I did sort of a hybrid comparison. For residential, I looked at population. For commercial, I looked at employment. For transportation, I looked at the sum of the population and the employment for each of the jurisdictions, and so on for some of the others to try to come up with something a little more fair. And when you do that and you take into account our business base, you can see we really are pretty much the lowest in the region in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per population and employment, which I just thought was an intriguing comparison. Again, business as usual forecast is if we were to continue to emit carbon at the same rate that we're currently doing that, what would we end up with based on our growth? And as you can see, by 2050, we're like 4 times where we are now. Chapter 3 is basically the goals and policies that are related to greenhouse gas emissions. These are taken from various chapters of the general plan. There's a combination here of existing policies that some of them which go back to 1990, the original general plan adoption, some of which are brand new, and those are marked by underlines that are very specific to greenhouse gases. Because in the general plan, the chapters are such that there are, in fact, greenhouse gas related policies and goals throughout nearly all of the chapters. We felt for this document it would be helpful to bring those all together in one place so that someone who's interested in that can then just come here and see them all. And again, there are existing policies, there are new policies. I'd certainly welcome any direction or feedback you might have on some of those. Chapter 4, which is kind of the heart of the matter, what is it we're going to do in order to try to meet these goals? both, again, for the city organization and for the community as a whole. As I mentioned, just generally, where we are likely to see 90% of our possible greenhouse gas impacts are in these areas that are identified here. We have a considerable amount of pre-Title 24 housing in the community, particularly the northern part of the community. And while certainly we'd hope that some of that has been retrofitted over the years, there's still probably, I think, a real wealth of opportunity there to help people improve their, weatherization, replace double pane windows to double pane windows, increased insulation, more efficient appliances, so on and so forth. Again, we have a large industrial base. We think there are probably some industrial processes out there that are fairly energy intensive. Particularly, for example, we know we have a number of refrigerated food distributors, and those use huge amounts of power. Fortunately, some of them have, in fact, are really kind of the pioneers here. Tony's Fine Foods has, I believe, the largest commercial solar power plant in the country, right here. Land use, again, the plans we have done, where essentially we have, I think, 15,000 units of quote-unquote transit-oriented development planned along the riverfront, is going to show extremely large reductions compared to the norm. And then beyond us, really a huge amount of the change that's going to happen is going to come from outside, and that is the National Fuel Vehicle Efficiency Standards, which I believe Obama put out some new revised standards, in fact, today, that are actually look to be consistent with the California standards that the governor proposed 3 years ago and was unable to get through EPA in the Bush administration. And the second being there's a requirement that all of the major utilities in California reach 33% renewable energy supply, get 33% of their power from renewable sources by 2020. And so those will make tremendous differences. In terms of the chapter, it's come a long ways. It's come along probably a little further in the last 3 weeks. I think I'm kind of honing in on the end. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel for it, and I hope by the end of April to have at least a full descriptions done for each of the measures. Finally, ICLEI recently put out another software program, a 12 megabyte Excel spreadsheet, if you're familiar with that allows you to basically calculate, okay, you're going to build 5,000 units of transit-oriented development. How much will that reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And we put in our individual numbers here, and that really begins to help me calculate where we're going to get. In terms of, as this ordinance begins to go through the hearing process, energy efficiency, from other ordinances, we find that an energy efficiency financing program plus conservation ordinances can make up 70–80% of the emission reductions for a city. Now, the financing program, I don't think that's going to be controversial. We've already started it. We've joined with some other cities and counties in California to set up an entity that's going to be able to provide financing based on being able to voluntarily place a lien on your property taxes, a charge against increase in your property taxes. That money then gets used to pay back the bonds that you borrow to make the energy efficiency improvements. And presumably you do that because you realize what you're going to save in gas and electric is more than what you're going to annually put out against collected with the property taxes. And that provides the advantage of really being able to finance those improvements over a 30-year period, even though the house may get sold 2 or 3 times in that time period. Really, I think a lot of the meat of the discussion is probably going to be conservation ordinances, which basically a number of cities have adopted, and it's saying you will do this. For example, on the residential side, you can't sell your house unless you get an energy audit and do at least these things. A few communities have done that. The same in commercial side, requirement on businesses to get a energy audit done and make certain improvements. And I think that's really going to be the controversial side of things, because obviously now we're imposing costs in a horrible economy and so on and so forth. Generally, where I'm leaning from at the moment is we are trying to do this over the next 40 years, and we can ease some of these conservation ordinances after we've tried the carrot for a few years. Again, we could do like happened with Title 24. When it was first adopted, there were fairly minor improvements needed. And over the years, every time they come around with a new building code, it gets a little stricter and a little stricter and a little stricter. Again, I think it's come a reasonable ways and it's getting close. The biggest task remaining to me now is to quantify emissions for each of these measures and bring that forward. And then Chapter 5, which is who's going to do what, how is it actually going to be handled and implemented and carried on over a 30, 40-year period. Haven't really started that chapter yet, but that will be in there. This is perhaps my optimistic schedule for completion of the plan. So far, I have taken the draft to most of the commissions, and hopefully in May, I will come close to having a document that's kind of ready for the public to really get into. I am working with trying to get, I've got some people from the chamber assigned to sort of be a subcommittee. I need to broaden that. I only got 2, so I need to find some other, I want to find some business people, find some community people to bring in as well to help fine-tune this. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Patek. We have no request to speak on this item from the public. So, and just a reminder to my colleagues that we're looking today at the basic organization and content to provide feedback to Mr. Patek as he's moving forward. So with that, any comments, feedback, questions?
I just have
Mr. Gavon?
a couple of comments. Obviously, as you pointed out, one of the controversial points will be the ordinance. And you kind of mentioned a little bit regarding energy audits. And I'm curious, surrounding communities are now requiring the energy audits? Is that what I heard?
Like Davis is requiring an energy audit upon sale. And then you have to make improvements based on that energy audit before you can close escrow.
So obviously, one of my concerns with that would be, you know, in this climate, it's very difficult to sell a home as it is, and placing additional costs is going to affect that negatively as well, as you know. So I'm curious what those kind of numbers are, what it costs to do an energy audit.
Well, energy audit,
How
you can
extensive
get an energy
are.
audit pretty much free. PG&E will do it for you anytime.
But then you have to make the improvements.
But the improvements, I mean, the improvements can run $3,000 to $10,000.
To meet a specific standard.
Yeah, do you need to replace your, you know, your entire HVAC system? If there's, you know, if you have no insulation in your roof, then obviously that's going to be an issue.
Sure. And then just a comment, when setting goals in reductions, I think you made the comment, one of them was whatever percentage it was below business as usual. And the only thing I would comment about that is that if business as usual is good, and you seem to answer that actually in your next comment when you gave me the comparisons to other cities, obviously, maybe it's not, but if at some point we're doing well with our emissions and we were below other communities, with setting those, is there a way to tie it to other averages? Besides what
Well, it's really, it's coming down from the state. It's pretty much a state direction, and we have a long ways to go. Remember, the goal is, the strict goal for the state is a 15% reduction from 2007 to 2020, and an 80% reduction by 2050. And that's an 80% reduction from knowing that there's going to be growth in the state. So it's really not a comparison with surrounding cities. It's really a comparison with state targets.
Well, your graph actually kind of explained that to me afterwards, but that was my initial thought on it. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Labor.
Sure. Running off that, the state mandate of an 80% reduction, we're proposing a 30%.
A lot of different things.
Okay.
The 80% reduction is from the 2007 level, absolute level. If you're emitting 100,000 tons of CO2, you've got to get to 20,000 tons of CO2.
Okay.
Regardless of what happens to your population and employment. The fact is, the 30% below business as usual with us being in a growth, probably in a growth mode during this period, is fairly comparable to the 80% from current.
Okay. Maybe I'll talk about this one offline. I'm not quite seeing that, because a 30% off of, say, 2050, when levels are 4 times what they are in 2007, a 30% reduction only takes us back to where we would be business as usual about 2035. So I don't see it. Can't do the math in my head, so maybe we'll come back to that one.
Okay.
Take that one offline. I do have a few comments. They're all in Chapter 3, actually. And a couple of them have to do with costs to the city and making sure that we're not doing things that are going to be unreasonable or expensive for the city to do. The city will update inventories every 3 years. So I'm on, actually, page 1 of Chapter 3, under emission targets, natural resources goal F. The city will update those inventories every 3 years to incorporate improved methods, better data. Is this something that's feasible for the city to do?
The municipal update is a fairly good level of effort, because it's much more specific. It's going to the employees and asking them, how many hours, how far do you commute? Do you use transit? Do you ride a bike, et cetera, et cetera? We actually go out and we look at the fleet, vehicle fleet, see, have we added any what's happened over that, how many gas miles, how much gas do we buy, those sorts of things. Yeah, it is definitely a commitment of effort for that, and we have the green team that would be doing that, and it's, but if we are the leader, we need to be able to say that we've done this, and that we've accomplished this. We have, in fact, reduced the city organization's emissions by X to me. The update of the community inventory really isn't that complicated. It's pretty much generally available public data that just gets kind of put in to the program, and having completed one, I could probably do another one in 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. I have a simple comment under public facilities and services goals J. We're still in Chapter 3, and I can't give a page number, so.
Right.
The page after the header page, under policies. Oh, you know what? Go to the next one. Land use goal A. Sorry, I didn't, it's the very next one. I didn't highlight it. I'll just make the comment. The statement is that the city shall strive to remove and minimize the effect of natural and man-made barriers such as the Sacramento River and deep water ship channel to accessibility between and within neighborhood corridors and centers. That statement was a little strong to me, partly because I feel that the rivers help define our city boundaries and who we are as a city. I'm not sure I want to eliminate that completely. Just
Well, yeah, and I don't think we're even beginning to talk about, what we're talking about is maybe another bridge across the Sacramento River, maybe some pedestrian crossings of the freeway, additional trails and so forth, more bridges across the main drain, those sorts of things. We're certainly not going to eliminate, you know, the identity that the river and the Yellow Bypass give us.
right, but the policy to remove and minimize the effect maybe isn't the correct
Okay.
wording there. Last one, I think it's the last one. Land use goal C, commercial and mixed use. I have just one kind of general comment for this whole section. Most of this doesn't seem to be relevant to the climate action plan. It seems to be some of our just general
Land
city
use.
ordinances, and I'm not quite sure how they relate.
Well, they relate in that dense, mixed-use development produces far less greenhouse gases than spread out and segregated development, simply because of the accessibility. I agree, it's probably one of the more tenuous areas of connection.
My recommendation, maybe just review the policies. For example, the city shall seek to selectively expand its share of the region serving retail and office development. Not quite sure how that addresses, except for maybe the overall, try and build a dense urban core. But maybe we can just state that instead.
Okay.
So
I would say one of the dilemmas I have here is if you look at the land use goal, commercial mixed use, I think that you have a fairly good argument that that is a good thing from a greenhouse gas emissions, and I have put all of the policies that are under that goal here, even though some of them are probably a lot less connected.
Okay.
So the alternative, I guess, is I could simply strike some of the policies.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll wait to hear how other commissioners feel. Sorry, I do have one more just general question. How does this policy document, the climate action plan, relate to the green ordinance and then further to the general plan?
Okay. You mean the green building ordinance?
Yes.
This is a much broader, all-inclusive look at how do we reduce greenhouse gases. One of the measures we're going to use to do that is adopt a green building ordinance.
Okay.
In terms of the general plan, as you can see, portions, policies, and goals from the general plan are incorporated here and guide the measures. The measures kind of follow out of those goals. There's, it's kind of a subject of debate. There are cities, some communities that are creating greenhouse gas or climate action chapters for the general plan, which this sort of is this. But what you find then is you're either duplicating a lot of policies that are already in other sections, or you're taking policies that really belong in other sections, that really make sense in other sections, and putting it in here. So the approach we've taken is the general plan will address in its normal chapters greenhouse gas goals and policies. And then we simply abstract those and put them in here as a reference, if you will. So that's how we're dealing with it. In terms of one of the relationships to the general plan is that essentially the Attorney General has said, if you're going to amend your general plan, if you're going to update your general plan, you had better handle greenhouse gases or I'm coming after you. So if you don't have a climate action plan and address it in your CEQA document, Mr. Brown will be after us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And Mr. Morzini,
I
any
have-
questions?
Thank you. I'm glad you did that little explanation at the end, Steve, because a lot of this stuff does seem to be redundant to other things, like talking about pedestrian access and the lack of, for example, lack of sidewalk in front of Our Lady of Grace School, you know, which is something we're all familiar with, but how that impacts our pedestrian traffic and that sort of thing. So you are abstracting a lot of things from other documents. But let me make sure I'm understanding you right. This is, the title of this climate action plan is a specific requirement. You just alluded to our Attorney General, and this is part of that mandate that we have.
I would say yes and no. The Attorney General has not said you have to do a climate action plan. He said you have to address greenhouse gas emissions in your environmental document.
So I'm wondering why
plan.
we're calling it a climate action plan, because in your presentation, you mentioned a lot about energy efficiency and conservation, and that's the kind of things that you do, and the result is you're friendlier to the environment by doing all of these things.
You know, the climate action plan is simply, it's a term of the art. It's what cities are calling these things.
When this was first introduced, and Commissioner Sandine, Chair Sandine mentioned about the green building thing, and I can't remember if it was that you were talking about earlier or this, but having to do with state law would be prescriptive, and we're trying to get out ahead of that. And there was a little debate about, well, should we try to be on the leading edge of this or wait for state mandates like Title 24 and those that would succeed 24, because our costs associated in this document, there's an indication of between 5 and 15% more costs associated with building to the standards that we would expect here. And we had some discussion about making sure that we're competitive with our neighbors as far as development costs and that sort of thing. So one of the things that I would really want to caution us, especially in these times, in fact, in Chapter 4, on the implementation scenario, you're very specific. Given the state of the economy in 2010, a mandatory energy conservation ordinance should be approached cautiously. And I'd like to urge that, because we're in a situation, for example, you explained the potential for a required audit, let's say a residential house for sale, an audit, and you indicated, well, there could be a cost between $3,000 and $10,000 to bring a house up. Well, probably the people sitting up here, we probably have well-insulated homes and dual pane windows and all that sort of thing. But demographically in West Sacramento, there are a lot of people that own their homes that could take a real big hit and selling their home for one reason or another. And I guess what I would really like to see is more of a positive, proactive approach that's alluded to in here. You mentioned the carrot. You know, PG&E has offered energy audits and voluntary things to improve efficiency, weather stripping, and that sort of stuff that's fairly inexpensive. And I think that our first approach to this, when it comes to the residential sector, is to just redouble an effort with a lot of positive working with the community to be able to better insulate homes and that sort of thing, because the cost of energy is increasing. Going to more renewable energy is going to be more costly than energy is now, and so people aren't going to be able to afford to be frivolous with their energy consumption. So we need to make sure, though, that we're not beating people over the head to get them to comply. That's the best way to get resistance that I can think of, and I don't see that much of an approach statewide for trying to incentivize people to practice energy conservation, especially when it comes to the home. In the new construction, we're going to get that with our standards. So I'm just thinking about the little guy here that could be more disproportionately affected by an aggressive campaign to reach higher levels. You indicated the state, if I understand you correctly, Steve, the state wants to see a 15% reduction, and we're talking about 30%, because that might put us on the leading edge. Well, maybe,
No.
is that,
Let me
am I
clarify.
misunderstanding you?
They're different starting points and different targets. The 15% is from where we are now. The 30% is from business as usual. Our business as usual is growing up here, so we need to get down 30% to get to their 15%.
Okay.
They're
So
fundamentally
I guess I'm
equivalent.
not the first one that misunderstood that. Maybe we might want to clarify that a little bit, or as far as what we're trying to
Those are the other
achieve.
graphs I have to work on yet.
Okay. So anyway, those are my comments. I'd really like to see a real active plan in voluntary improvement in energy conservation measures and that sort of thing. I would hate to see the audit with a punitive result. That's going to be very costly for probably the demographic in our community that could least afford it.
Yeah, I mean, a voluntary approach for a number of years is where I'm headed, where my thoughts are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ledesma or Ms. Blackburn?
No, I don't have any, not that haven't been addressed already.
Thank you, Mr. Ledesma.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I just have just a couple of quick questions regarding the document and kind of, you know, I saw in your time frame that we want to get this probably as a document looked at and hearing, I think by late summer. You're looking at in the fall. And I'm just curious, because we start debating things here, as we just did, talking about approaches, whatever else. And I'm just curious on our approach on this, because I'm glad you clarified that we are not required by anybody to have a climate action plan. I think we've taken upon ourselves to have one. Are we trying to get all of, I know you have folks from the chamber that are helping put this together. I'd like to have a plan that is in place, whether it's are we going for putting everything in here as much as we can get, and then are we trying to get that to council? Is that our approach with this, to try to get this as final and as encompassing as possible? Or, because I would wonder, because there's probably, given the economic climate, given where we are as a city and what we can afford and what we can't, it seems that we've gotten to the first two, 3 chapters, which embody what we already have in place by way of policy and explaining the issue and where we need to go and explaining our goals. I'm trying to get to a point where it's actually implementable versus the plan and the process of putting together a plan. I think, I tend to try to get to things that are, we probably could have the best, most great-looking action plan. But I'm not seeing that as a definition of being a leader in climate action. I think if we can find a way to look at our approach on this and say, we know what other cities are doing, to try to, because I don't see this as a one-stop, we're done. We've got to continue to do that. So what I'm wondering is the approach on this is to start on a I don't want to say a smaller level, but certainly get to the things quickly that we can implement and debate that are without, as we heard here, very well articulated, just cost to the city that are going to, that are just not perceivable now. Things that aren't going to be that we would all agree on, and how we get there is egregious. Just, what type of implementation actions would there be in Chapter 4 and implementation plan 5 to follow, that we can actually get through and say, okay, we've gotten the kind of the spear of the tip of the spear through, and now there's kind of the big monster questions having to do with, how it impacts further development. I'm just thinking about the approach we're taking, and that we're trying. I just don't want it to be where the best is the enemy of the good. It's kind of like that philosophy.
We're very definitely not. I mean, the plan that we're putting together, it covers a whole bunch of things, but as you look into it, in the Measure 4, for example, there's a discussion of the AB 811 financing program, which is going to be one of the key weapons we have. And we're in the process of setting that up. That is being formed. You know, there's an organization that I think by the end of the summer, they're going to start opening offices and making loans. For example, the green building ordinance is, you know, one of the measures is adopt a green building ordinance. Well, you know, we spent the last year developing a green building ordinance. We're going to go back now and sort of recast it so that it's more consistent with the state green building code. But we're definitely, you know, that process hasn't stopped. It's going to continue.
I guess that's maybe the misconceptions I'm having. We're not stopping.
No, we're
to
not.
get everything in here and then trying to get it all approved, because that just seems very inefficient to me.
Right.
So
No, I think
that's my misconception of what's
You
going
can see in
on
the
here.
discussion of the things that, you know, as a municipal organization, we have done in the last 3 or 4 years.
Right.
And those are ongoing on a continuing basis. And they will continue. The plan, in a lot of ways, steals from what we're already working on and puts it in a document.
But there seems to be an element that we haven't got to yet. Is that a true statement?
Yes, that would be, really, the nuts and bolts of it is going to be, you know, conservation ordinances. I'm not working on a conservation ordinance. I don't plan to work on a conservation ordinance. I'll be retired before we do a conservation ordinance. So.
Is that the main element? Is that the?
I think that's really going to be the
elephant in the
stickiest
room
one,
that we're
yes.
not. Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess and that's sort of, I appreciate the conversation, because that's when we read this, you're right. There's a lot of stuff that I know we've implemented by way of policy, or it's out there by policy. You know, I just, you know, I think we want a climate action plan. We want it to make sense and something that we can say we're implementing 90% of it as we speak. So the document is just what it is. It's just it's memorializing what we already have agreed to do. And I think, from my perspective, because the next discussion that we have on general plan has a similar question about how we incorporate, you know, how we incorporate other issues into our general plan. Do we do another standalone document? I think it's on the health policy. You know, do we do a standalone policy on that versus just incorporate it into our general plan? I think we've started to incorporate in our general plan, and I'm just trying to find a way to make an efficient use of getting, so we can deliberate and kind of get to, like, we understand what the plan is, we understand the elements of it, you know, and this does a good job, because you don't realize how many policies we already had that address it. You know, but there are kind of, I would think, a few things we want to get to, that I don't want the actual development of the plan to get in the way of getting to those things. That's my only point. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope that the discussion's been helpful. I actually
helpful.
have to say I appreciate having this come to us at this stage. I know it's not complete, and you've shared with us parts that will be coming and working on in the future, but I think it's helpful for us to be able to give feedback while you're working on moving this forward. And I'd like to just echo and kind of underline some of the comments about having responsible leadership. I think we should be a leader in this area, but being responsible to the citizens and to the businesses here, and also be responsive. So I think that is the direction this is going, and I think to Mr. Ledesma's point about this being, we're actually taking action now, so this was like putting a punctuation mark on some of the things we're already doing, and then are contemplating the future through the general plan revision. I also would like to laud your approach of recycling use language from other places where it's appropriate. You know, I appreciated in the staff report that was given to us, just having us acknowledge that we're doing this in a very efficient and frugal, in some respects, way. I think we do need to do this, and I just appreciate that given the state of the economy. So I thank you for the work, and hopefully you've gotten some helpful feedback.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that takes us to item number 11, our last agenda item of the evening, and this is a public workshop and discussion of the West Sacramento General Plan Update policy issues. I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Riccola.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This is the second item that we've had on the policy document. And to recap, last time we had a discussion on a level service policy as well as the vision statement. And tonight I'd like to do three things. is, first of all, review the revised vision statement with you, go over the paper that we prepared on healthy communities, and then last, have Steve Paddock talk about the ever page-turning, exciting thing of amortization. So beginning with the issue of the vision statement, one thing I neglected to do and may be helpful to you now, and I did go make copies, is provide you with the previous vision statement. It was not included in your staff report. Would that be helpful for any of the commission members? Okay.
The previous one from the previous
Last meeting from last meeting, right.
Exactly.
We gave feedback for,
We're trying to forget that one.
And
thank
at
you,
the
Mr.
previous meeting, there were a number of comments from the commission, and they basically fell into just a few general categories. And the primary one being is that it's too long, take it and condense it, make it short. I think Commissioner Morosini and Moore indicated that make it kind of like a mission statement. So I went back, looked at the terms, started from a more general perspective, then worked down to some of the individual issues. And in the previous drafts that Mr. Paddock had worked on, what we had done is sort of drew on a lot from the city's strategic plan and had some of the general statements, but I tried to even condense that a little bit more and take the basic 7 or 8 paragraphs we had and condense it down to 3 paragraphs. So hopefully we're on the right direction. So, but the first item tonight would be to review the revised vision statement, get your comments so that we can hopefully come close to closing the door on the vision and move on to other issues.
Thank you. I think what might be helpful is if we could have the 3 presentations, we'll have the public, do have a request to speak, and then we'll come back and talk item by
Okay,
item
great.
through them. I just think that might be helpful for
Okay,
us.
that would be great also. The second item that I'd like to talk about is the issue of healthy communities. And it's an interesting subject in a number of areas, but as the Planning Commission may recall, when we were working on the background report and the issues and opportunities report some time ago, this was an issue that has not been discussed previously in our existing general plan. In 2007, the city prepared a brief background report analysis looking at the incidence of certain chronic diseases in the city, in particular asthma, type 2 diabetes, and then a lot of focus on trends going on countywide, citywide, and statewide with obesity, both in terms of our youth as well as older adults. So we prepared a paper. A lot of the information that we received on that paper came directly from our work with the Yolo County Public Health Department. That paper was, as I indicated, was done and summarized in the background report. It was talked about with our council. The city council, as well as some of the comments that came from the Planning Commission, have indicated a great interest in addressing the area of healthy communities. Our existing general plan deals with it only in a general basis. So tonight what we've done is identify a number of policy areas that could be addressed in terms of healthy communities, identified a few key questions, as well as 3 individual policy options to deal with on healthy communities. Now, interestingly enough, earlier in today, I met with the West Sacramento Health Collaborative, which is a group of interested agencies and individuals, including representatives from the Yolo County Public Health Department, a Commission on Aging. Several of the council members and other commissioners are on the mailing list and show up from time to time, individuals in our Parks and Recreation Department, as well as interested community members. And one of the representatives tonight is here, Dr. Charlene Hauser, who is a family practitioner with UC Davis, but is currently on loan with the Yolo County Public Health Department and has been advising the collaborative on a number of issues as well. So tonight we're looking for guidance on a couple issues. First of all, we've outlined 3 different ways of how healthy communities can be addressed. And the first general one is A few communities, though not many, prepare a separate health element of their general plan, feeling that health is such a significant issue that it needs to be addressed directly, it needs to be identifiable. The city of Richmond, as well as, was probably the most prominent city to do a health element. It took them a little bit over 3 years to do it, and at a cost of in excess of $3 million to prepare their health element. But they had federal assistance on that. But again, that's one approach. The other one is basically to take all the concerns that involve health, healthy communities in terms of healthy eating, availability of services, access to clean air, both indoor and outdoor, and a number of other issues, and address them individually in each individual element of the general plan, much like the approach that Steve talked about, or alluded to anyway, that we're dealing with climate. So there would be policies throughout the general plan on addressing healthy communities and land use, transportation and circulation, health and safety, even parks and recreation, since health affects so many individual aspects of our general plan. And this is the option that we're really requesting that the Planning Commission offer. I think it makes the most sense. It tries to integrate health as a major concern of the general plan, and seems to fit well. So that's something we're also looking for as well. In addition to looking at those policy options, we're also looking at, the broader issues, the broader policy issues in terms of what can the city do to encourage new health providers and hospitals to locate in proximity to existing transit routes, and just basically locate in the city. And Dr. Hauser today shared with us a proposal that she felt that was intriguing in terms of trying to bundle certain types of health services when a potential community clinic comes to potentially locate in the city, to make sure that total health needs are being provided as opposed to just health needs in certain specialized areas. So that, in short, is the second paper. Now I turn to Steve, who will address the issue of amortization.
Yes, members of the commission, land use amortization is a tool that cities have used to achieve some goals for quite a long time. It was really kind of kicked off by Los Angeles County many, many years ago, I think in the 1940s or so, where they had just an explosion of gas stations. There were gas stations seemingly on every corner because they'd originally been allowed in virtually every commercial zone. Eventually, the county determined that they're not going to be viable in the long run to have that many, that they were essentially crowding out other commercial uses. They changed the zoning to make them non-conforming uses in many places. And then they take another step and basically said, we're going to do a study and we're going to figure out how long it takes to get a fair return off the investment of constructing a gas station. And we're going to adopt an ordinance that says once you have essentially gotten that fair return amortized and you've essentially depreciated the asset, then you have to move. And that we can require you to do that, and we don't have to pay you because you have gotten your basically your money's worth back out of that initial investment. So that was challenged, and it was upheld and successfully implemented. Now, it's something that's used very rarely. It's a fairly draconian tool, if you will. So we don't see it used very often, but it is part of, the tools available to us. We have the tank farms on the South River Road in Stone Bluffs area that has long been our policy to try to relocate off the river to other locations in the city. We've been working with trying to persuade the tank farm owners to do this. We've put together essentially a plan for a joint tank farm on the port that they could move into, lease space at, or just basically have everything handled for them. And they've not indicated a whole lot of enthusiasm or interest. And there also are uses on West Capitol Avenue, auto wrecking yards. There's a few of them still there that maybe we would like to, again, see someplace else. We looked at this issue 10 years ago. An amortization ordinance basically would require that we go in and do an extremely elaborate economic and accounting analysis of the original investment that the petroleum companies put into building those facilities, all of the improvements and or upgrades or expansions that they've done over the years, and try to sort of amortize off each of those until we can come to a date where we can, again, fairly say, you've gotten your money back out of that, now you need to move. We got estimates for this 10 years ago, and it sounded like it was, the study was in the neighborhood of $500,000, and the general consensus was we need a $500,000 study because if you adopt an ordinance, the petroleum companies who have got, you know, more lawyers than we've got employees will be coming after us, and they will fight that, and they will fight it vigorously, and that we could easily spend another $500,000 defending that ordinance and the amortization study. We decided at that time that basically that just wasn't a fight we could afford to pick at that time. Again, we have reached the point where we had policies that basically tightened the grip on the tank farms over the last 2 decades. And now, essentially, they can keep what they've got, but they can't expand them at all. One of the options would be to put language in the general plan saying we're going to do an amortization study and then fund that outside the general plan, but follow through, fund the amortization study, adopt an amortization ordinance, and try to enforce it. The option 2 is really just, there's a lot of language, there's language left in the general plan from 2005 and 2007, and really I think we would, Jeff, absolutely do option 2, which is just clean all of that out and just have a policy that says you can't expand. So the issue really is option 1. We've talked to redevelopment, some other people in the city, and as much as we would like to do this, the general consensus that's come back is, again, we really don't have the resources, staff, or cash at this time to fight this fight. And really maybe what we're better off doing is focusing our efforts on making the Bridge District happen, be successful, begin to really see things happening out there. Eventually, build a South River Road Bridge and start running residential traffic past them, and at that point, they'll get the idea. One of the reasons maybe we can wait is the amortization study is not how many years do you amortize it from when you do the study. We're going to look back the 60 years that those tank farms have been there and study it, and it may very well come to the conclusion that they've already fully amortized those investments, or 10 years from now, we could come to that conclusion and try it again. And I suppose an alternative would be to put some language in the general plan that says we're going to do an amortization study and adopt an amortization ordinance, and just understand that we're probably not going to do it real soon. So that's maybe an alternative to version of 1. That's it for my presentation.
Thank you. I do have one request to speak, if there are any clarifying questions before I ask the member of the public to speak. All right, Dr. Hauser?
I am here on behalf of the West Sacramento Health Commission, Health Collaborative. And I kind of wanted to tell you a little bit about why I'm involved in the collaborative and tell you how we think we can be of help in working with the general plan. I'm a family physician. I didn't start out this way. I started out as a surgeon, and I did a year of surgery internship where I operated on a lot of people for chronic disease. And I said, I have to do something about this, and clearly operating on them is not changing the world, right? So I switched to family medicine, where I would be able to help patients out in a more preventative health manner. And even in my clinic, I can't do enough. And that's why I'm moving into the communities, and you're seeing a lot more family physicians moving into the communities to make the difference where we can, because even in the clinic, it's starting to become too late. So I joined the West Elk Health Collaborative through the Yolo County Department of Public Health to do just such things as this, which is get involved with general planning and help create healthy communities so that our patients don't have to make the hard choice, so that they can make the easy choice in order to be healthy. So a lot of the other members on the collaborative are not necessarily physicians. They are members from the Yolo County Department of Public Health. They're from a lot of the other groups that Steve talked about, and they all share the same passion, which is making the healthy choice the easy choice for our community members. That being said, we have been talking with Steve today and have been working on this for the last couple of months about where we can really be of benefit for West Sacramento. There certainly are a lot of parts of the general plan that fit in with healthy planning. I mean, it's all part of it. It really is. And so what we can do is work on creating some policies that are maybe a little bit more creative and require a little less money than Richmond certainly worked with. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. And so we're putting our heads together to come up with some ideas to help present to the commissioners about how we can make West Sacramento a healthy community.
Thank you. All right, we'll bring this back to the commission, and as we did at the last meeting, we'll work through the different areas. Let's start with the vision statement, then we'll work on healthy communities. I know it's going 1 to 3 and then back to 2. Mr. Ledesma.
No, I was just going to suggest while she was up there to take 3, but that's fine.
Okay, we could, I'm
That way
fine.
she doesn't have to listen to the
Okay, let's go
group
back.
composition that will be the vision
Hey,
statement.
we had to sit here through this.
Let's go 3, 2, 1. How about that?
That's
So we'll
fine.
start with the healthy community. So, all right. So staff is looking, I believe, for direction from us about key questions and the policy options and get some sense of that. And I know Mr. Ledesma, you have some
Yeah, I
comments.
just,
Okay.
if we're ready to kind of jump in, and I just had some questions, because you brought up, first of all, this is a terrific subject. I'm glad we're thinking of this and being as proactive as we are, because it's something we've kind of, I think we, as a community, we've addressed here and there, but it's just nice to see it kind of as a focus area for us and possibly into the general plan. But you brought up something I just want to follow up on one of the key points you brought up is locating health services throughout the community. You're trying to find a way to bring those in as a possible policy focus area. Was that what I heard you?
I wanted to raise the issue, and at time to time, we've had discussions with different health service providers and HMOs that practice in the Sacramento area, and there's some interest in locating in the city, but the issue comes down to really a number of rooftops and making it advantageous for them to locate here. And certainly, we realize that it's part of a bigger issue, and it's really not necessarily the only means of how health care services can be provided in the community. It's just this was one of the issues that came about as part of the stakeholder interviews, as part of the issue opportunities. Many residents in the community indicated, hey, we're tired of driving to Sacramento or Davis or Vacaville for health services. What can you do as a city to get services and major facilities that are more centrally located to where I live? Not just accessible by transit, but in my community. So that's sort of how the issue came about. It was more from what we heard as opposed to staff's personal opinion.
So I think if you're in, I think if I'm correct, we're supposed to be provide feedback whether we believe that's something that should be our further probe. I think it is, because I think it's just something, the things I think about and I've learned over the past year through the elderly nutrition program was the need and the impact all of a sudden transit has on folks being able to get to places. And we all know regional transit are suffering budget cuts just like everyone else. And it's making it harder and harder for our seniors and others to be able to get from place to place. That's a recurring theme I'm hearing. So I think this is a really pertinent area that absolutely should be, I think, looked at in terms of ways that we can plan and ways that we can address the issue of having some services within our, not just in Central City, which is the most obvious area, but even within neighborhoods and outside of there. So in Southport or other areas of that they can get to even a clinic. Or a bill, and I think I brought this up before in some of our discussions in the general plan, is just being able to have more areas where even a doctor that wants to, or a group of doctors want to open up a smaller facility. We see some of that has occurred already in the neighborhood commercial areas or in the Southport Town Center. Just encouraging more growth like that would be a way to address this, I think. So I think it is a really important point. I'm glad you addressed it, and that was really my only feedback to this point. I'll let the other commissioners weigh in. Thank you.
Mr. Morzini.
Thank you. This is really a thought-provoking document here, and I like the way you laid it out, Steve, with the bullet points. And I kind of want to echo some of what Commissioner Ledesma just said. Looking through this, I see that actually we ought to be proud of our community in a lot of ways because we're addressing a lot of these things. For example, the first one, convenient and safe opportunities for physical activity. We have a tremendous recreation center here now, and people of all ages go there. The senior center focuses on the elderly people, and they have a very active program. The school is what better place for physical activity. I'm not sure what's required anymore of students, high school students and grammar school students, but there's the opportunity, and if there's any focus, maybe it ought to be put on working cooperatively with the Unified School District to make sure that we're providing physical activity for children. The access to healthy foods for all residents, Mr. Ledesma just mentioned the elderly nutrition program. The schools, again, they should be focusing on that. And maybe for something that we might want to identify for the general plan is for our community center, our new community center, to be able to have programs for this type of thing for the general public, where we have seminars for healthy living and ways that people might be able to recreate, seminars and that sort of thing. The fresh air thing, Steve Paytek just addressed that regarding what we're going to try to do in the community, and I'm not sure what beyond that we can do besides educate people as to more healthy lifestyle. And then the neighborhoods that sustain mental health and promote social interaction. We're part of the blueprint, and our developments looking into those amenities and those opportunities with the trails that we have and trying to be a pedestrian-friendly community and that sort of thing. But the one that Commissioner Ledesma just mentioned that I targeted too is the health services throughout the community. That is an area that we could really focus on and try to recruit medical professionals, not only for the physical part, but the mental aspect of our health too. It would be tremendous if we had the population that could support a small hospital, for example. But the clinics that we do have some, and we could probably benefit having more and having them strategically located near where their clients would be, like by the McDowell Center or in the Bridge District where we're going to have densely populated areas. So maybe that's part of what we ought to do in our general plan is to target health service providers to locate in our community. And I think that your option one, you're talking about the city council identify those health policy issues, if any, that we'd like in the general plan to cover that are relevant and actually not otherwise covered in any other documents. And that one to me would be the one that I would recommend. I think that's what Mr. Ledesma is also saying. But of all of them, I think that's the one that stands out the most. I think the others are.
One comment I'd like to make that apparently didn't do a very good job on earlier is the distinction between option 1 and option 3 is that option 3 assumes that all 6 of the areas that sort of been laid out, and the areas that have been laid out were, it's sort of a series of issues that were laid out by the National Public Health and Law Institute, or excuse me, I'm confusing the terms slightly, but the difference being that 1, allow the council to select the issues that they think are important, 3 being all of the issues are important and locate them strategically throughout the general plan. So once again, that's sort of the distinction between 1 and 3, and I realize that they're somewhat, might be somewhat confusing in the way it's been presented.
And I guess,
That's
Steve,
really the difference.
Yeah, and I looked at that one before the meeting, you know, when I read over the information, and I guess I'm satisfied that most of those other opportunities are covered,
Okay.
and that this is the one that stands out as one that would, rather than put a bunch of stuff in there that may not be taken seriously, to really focus on the essential one, because I think the others are or can be easily covered in the normal course of city business.
Can I ask a clarifying question, and then I'll move on for other comments, but is it possible to do like a 1+3 option? I mean, because I actually agree that that's the area we just discussed is a focus, but for me, I think all of these items are important, and I personally like this identifying by symbol that they're health related, because then you could pull those out. You could do, if you wanted to do a 1-pager with those items, that could be done as well. So, and I actually think while that item that was pulled out is important, I can't imagine us not moving forward and at least planning more comprehensively. So I don't know if it's a 1+3. I mean, it's.
It can be anything, of course, you choose. One of the advantages of course, option 1 is that allows to have a debate and dialogue, not only at the commission, but at the council level as to what they mean, their significance, how to deal with them for policy language, and then above all, what sort of implementation programs we can set forth to actually get what we want to see accomplished within a relatively short time frame. Because as we know, the policies on their own are just policies. We need actions to make certain that we can see change occurring in our community.
Okay, that's fair. All right. Any other comments, Mr. Liebig?
Yeah,
Mr.
I would
Allen?
like to first echo Commissioner Morazzini and Commissioner Ledesma's comments regarding the location of health services. And I too was struck by the fact that I think we have the infrastructure in place for to make some real progress in some of these areas. And I thought about the rec center as well, and you know, some of the things that facility could do to help accomplish some of these goals. You know, using the staff there to provide some off-site exercise classes, nutrition classes. You know, we have the community access channel. Maybe there's something they could do on the community access channel. So I think there's some things that we can do in that area, and I also like the option number 3. I think all of these issues are important to at least address, and ferret out later, you know, how we address them and what kind of resources we apply to each. But I think that they're pretty comprehensive, so I would go with option 3.
Thank you, Mr. Liebig.
Okay, my turn. I wanted to first thank Dr. Hauser for coming out and for her comments and her passion in our community. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think all 6 bullet points are very pertinent to a good life here in West Sacramento. And I think number 2, option 2, points it out clearly that health goals and policies must be integrated throughout all elements comprising the general plan update. I think that is very important for the happiness of our community and health. And Ron went through a whole list of things that are just examples of how we've already been doing that. I don't think we will ever be done, however, planning our community. And so then I think it is important to keep everything balanced. And therefore, I would go with option 3.
Ms. Blackburn? Thank you, Mr. Levy.
I would absolutely love to see at least an urgent care in our area. I'm tired of driving to Alhambra or Natomas, and they're always crowded. So as far as the minimum of getting some kind of health, besides regular doctor's offices, would be some type of urgent care located centrally in the city. My other concern was on the, actually the first bullet point, creating convenient and safe opportunities for physical activity. I know over the last couple of years, I guess, the new rec center has been, fully promoted. It's brand new and everything. And I just wonder how we can already promote our current parks, especially during the spring and summertime. Not a lot of people have access to internet to be able to check out the Parks and Rec website, which is a wonderful site. So I wonder if we could somehow integrate into the schools, either have flyers go home or during the parent-teacher conferences, things like that, so that they can reach the parents and of the students of our community, especially in the Brighton Broderick area, the area that I live in. I just think that our parks there are always busy during this time of year, and I just wonder if we start having classes and things like that, nutrition classes, how do we promote to all of the areas in an economically feasible way, besides just internet access? I think that was it. I know we have fluoride now, so kind of happy about that. That was the only other health issue.
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. So, Mr. Rickola, I think you're hearing from us, some of us like 1, some of us like 3. Is that, I know that that's not a definitive answer for you for moving forward, but is that at least get us going in some direction?
I think that gets us going. I think what I'm hearing is that everyone recognizes that's an important issue, would like it addressed. It's just there's some slight difference in terms of how it can best be done. And I don't think they're necessarily independent. I think they can be combined. And perhaps the decision point is that when it is brought to council, have at least a discussion of what the individual components mean and providing examples, and not necessarily assume, as option 3 does, that all of them are significant and must be included.
I think that's fair. All right.
Great,
Well,
thank you.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if there was a lot of talk about the 5th bullet point. Do we want to try to emphasize that one? It seemed like there was consensus that was one specific service that seemed to be lacking in our community.
The location of health services throughout the community.
Right.
I think Mr. Rickola heard us
You got that?
Yes.
riff on that for a bit. All right. Thanks again, Dr. Hauser, for being here. And now we'll move backward to attachment 2, land use amortization. So comments, direction, thoughts on this one, Mr. Ledesma?
Thank you. So, in reading through this, I'm, and then hearing the staff present, I'm just maybe a little confused, because obviously, it's an important point. We've especially when you put the tank farms into the scope of this. But, so are we saying, just to clarify for me, kind of the option 3, just because of its implicit cost and not only for the study, is that right? Am I looking at the right one? Option 3 has the, looking at the study, providing the study and doing the subsequent lawsuit that we'd have to defend ourselves against. It just makes it theoretically not feasible. I mean,
I think in terms of, well, option 1 really is, as I said, option 2 is just to clean up. You probably could ignore option 2. It's a kind of a cleanup language. Option 1 is, do we go after them with an amortization study? And generally, you would use
sorry.
redevelopment funds or something like that.
Right.
to do that study.
Yeah, because option 3 is a combination of 1 and 2.
Yeah,
Just
it's
clear
just doing
the
both.
message. But, so I guess my question is in the absence of the necessary funds to even implement option 1, it seems like we're sort of, option 2 seems like the only thing we can do.
You know, sitting here and thinking about this, I could come up with an option 1A that basically said something to the effect that the city will consider adoption of an amortization ordinance to require removal of the tank farms if adequate progress is not being made in relocating them at such time as the Pioneer Bluff area is deemed ready for redevelopment. So there'd be some at least recognition that we know about this and we think we're going to use it if we need to, but not bind ourselves to have to go out there and do it next year.
Yeah, and I guess that's the trigger point for that would be then the issue, kind of when is that time frame? Because we could, I would argue that time came and went because we were under exclusive negotiating agreement on that area generally for redevelopment. So it's just, we
were never in negotiating on that
along
area.
south of there, along the
Stone Locks. Yeah.
So in essence, you can say we're getting closer. But again, that's just sort of splitting. I know it's splitting hairs at this point, but I'm just, I hate to put in something with such a loud bark but everyone knows will have no bite. That's my only comment on it. Just, if there could be a way to do it, I'm all for it because I think that's ultimately we want to get to. When we looked at the port farm, the farm issue, we were hoping that maybe economic incentives or the economic piece of it might make sense for them. And obviously, apparently, because it's not, we're looking at this, it isn't working. So anyway, so that I guess that's my point. If we could find a way to make that happen, and by inserting the language that at some point, when it's economically feasible, or we maybe establish a fund to make it economically feasible, that we have some, maybe that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, I actually like the idea of even if it's just a bark without a bite right now. I like that thinking about this tonight, that you've come up with a possibility of putting it in maybe softly that may be to come. Because when we think about the general plan and the shelf life or the planning life of that, I would hate for us not to have at least tipped the hat that this is something that we're contemplating as a city, because I do think we want to do this, and I think it should be somehow in a masterful way, which I know you can do that for us. I personally think it would be nice to have something in there in the general plan. So, but I don't want to stop debate. So other comments on this or other feedback?
I have some thoughts.
Okay, Mr. Marzini?
They're kind of along the same lines, although, first of all, I don't think we want to be arbitrary. We don't want to just throw something out there that's not practical. For example, if this document is going to be a 10-year document, then we just got through the Bridge District right now, and they're out there moving dirt, and we're going to wait for the first construction, and who knows when that's going to be. And there's a lot of land in the Bridge District that needs to be developed, and the desire and the cost associated, it might not be another state grant that'll help us, although we will, hopefully, within a few years, we'll have that South River Road Bridge built, and we'll get traffic across there, and that'll help. But I drove out there today to try to figure out, okay, what are our options there? And to me, I don't want to go away from the plan on getting the tank farm relocated. But here we have owners of a tank farm. We have another oil person that has land tied up that wants to move them there, but where else could you move them unless you negotiated with Mr. Wickland to do that? And then looking at the site, that's a consolidated area right adjacent to the Pioneer Bridge, and theoretically, development could occur around the tank farm. And I can see that, like Steve Patek says, litigation, if we take them on, we're going to get beat up. We may prevail, but then what do we have? We probably end up with a requirement to help pay to relocate somebody that has a viable business. And I kind of like the idea of talking or making the statement that we're not backing off from wanting to relocate those tank farms, but not setting a date certain that they have to be relocated, because I don't think we could enforce that. And we may not want to, at the time that it comes where that amortization time expires or getting close to it, we might not be prepared to do anything with that property. So, and the same with West Capitol Avenue, we don't want to forget about that, because option 1 and 2, I don't think even, or 2 doesn't address the West Capitol Avenue area, but the same thing with the auto wreckers. I remember as a 10-year-old kid walking by Orbit Motors on West Capitol Avenue. It's still there. It has a different name now, and there are different garage doors that they're using for fences. But it's, it's still there. It's Sycamore, and the one, the Toyota place down the street is there. But they're pretty much concealed right now, and I'd hate to force those folks out and turn that into a blighted area prematurely. So I have a little concern about getting arbitrary as far as dates certain that different uses have to be gone. I think it would be appropriate to indicate that the city will work to transform that area. And not only the auto records, but anything that's a legal non-conforming use, we're going to want to transform into a legal conforming use. So I'd hate to, like the bite worse or the bark worse than the bite kind of thing. I don't think we want to send messages that are out there that we can't enforce. I think we need to be more practical about it, but stating our intentions, because we really don't have anything about West Capitol Avenue in the general plan, and I think we need to address that, but not from a date certain perspective. And then the same with the tank farms, that we need to make that transition eventually, but I would fully support not allowing any improvements other than the maintenance of the facilities. I think that's the next step that we haven't taken yet, and it seems like a practical one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morazzini. Other comments?
I just had one question. Maybe I'm not reading this right. In option 1, it says adoption of an amortization ordinance for non-conforming uses in a specific area. Would that ordinance, it can only be used for those redevelopment areas, or should that ordinance be something that the city could use when it deems necessary anywhere in the city?
It could certainly be drafted as a fairly generic ordinance, and then you would do the studies for the specific uses you wanted to put pressure on.
I just would hate to have to come back 5 years down and readdress it. I think maybe it should be a broad ordinance.
In fact, it'd probably be more legally defensible if it were written as a general tool.
Right. I think the language here is probably building on what's already in your general plan, where there's specific reference to the Pioneer Bluff area. And as I recall, there is a little bit of language in it that starts to kind of take a quarter step towards amortization. Remember, though, that the amortization study we're talking about would have to be fairly specific. Mm-hmm. So you would be, if the number of $250,000 to $500,000 is an accurate one, it might not be that much for every use, but you can expect to spend quite a bit for each of the individual uses.
Sure. No, I understand. I understand that.
But some general language that supports the idea of using amortization as a tool in appropriate circumstances. You could certainly have some more general language like that.
I would encourage
that. I think that was the point Ms. Sandini clarified for me, is that you do want it. I'm not saying not to put the bark out there. It's just sort of say, but I know from our standpoint, you like to be able to have it if that time came. So Mr. Galvan's right, this is a 10-year document or ongoing document. Who's to say in 5 years we're not back in a time that we could afford it. You just, I think we want to be able to have that as a tool, just to pull it out if we have to. You don't want to, but it's there.
Mr. Liebig? Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Generally, I agree with Commissioners Morosini and Galvin. Even though they said two different things, I'll explain why. I don't think it would be wise to focus in on one property or one property owner. We are looking at conforming uses or non-conforming uses. The individual studies would have to be specific. So every non-conforming use type that you would be looking at would be a study. Mr. Patek seems to be discussing a lot about carrots and sticks, and this is definitely one of those tonight. I am generally in favor of holding up a carrot for this. Amortization is an awfully big stick, and when the community came together, it wasn't that long ago, 23 years ago. We might leave a lot of people feeling resentful if we, are beginning to force people to move around in our city, and a lot of people might actually see it as being premature. I would therefore go with option 2, generalizing it a little bit more, cleaning it up, but conforming uses, non-conforming uses, not necessarily focused on specific areas.
Thank you, Mr. Liebig. Ms. Blackburn?
I agree with Commissioner Liebig. Option 2.
All right, I think if I can summarize, but please let me know if I'm not summarizing correctly. I have a feeling that we all are supportive of option 2, but perhaps it's also possible to test with the council if there's an interest or willingness, or they have an interest in wanting to go the amortization. I'm having a hard time with that word tonight. Going that route as well. So I think we're generally supportive of 2, but a few of us, that may be something to contemplate in the future. So when you're going forward to the council, I think you may need to get more direction from them.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, any other comments or feedback? Is that helpful in terms of
Yes.
direction? Thank you very much. And the last item, moving back to the vision document, and it's always fun to draft items by committee. So let's talk at the highest level. Is this moving forward for the direction we provided last time? Or
I'd like to add some text.
Oh, great.
Certainly is shorter.
I'm kidding.
Okay.
Let me take the first sentence.
Okay. Okay. We're going to do the editing by committee, my favorite. All right, Mr. Morosini.
You cut it in about a third of what it was, and I want to congratulate you for that. I'd like to see it briefer, but I'm just going to address the first 2 sentences, or the first 2 lines. And the first comment would, we're talking about build on the success of the last 23 years, and this document is going to get older, and then we're going to have to count 23 years from when. And so you might say the first 2 decades or whatever, rather than make it just appropriate for today. And then the part of that sentence that follows that, as a vibrant city, okay, so West Sacramento is going to be vibrant, where people can live, work, and play. Well, somehow you need to describe how they're going to live, work, and play. It's not vibrantly. It's a vibrant city where you could maybe prosperously or enthusiastically or whatever that adverb would be. Insert something in there to describe how you're going to work, live, and play.
I thought you said you wanted it shorter. No, I'm just kidding.
And then after that, I put a period, and I'd say we're done with it.
Okay. Oh, just one sentence.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
No, I'm just going to address that part of it.
Okay.
So those are my comments.
No, thank you, Mr. Morosini. I was just saying that in jest. It was just-
I'm not kidding.
Okay. Any, Mr. Galvan?
I'll just comment on that. Maybe it's just a transition, because I kind of read it as it sort of describes it in the following 2 paragraphs, how we're going to live, work, and play. So maybe that could be just transitioned a little better. I'm not quite sure how you would do that, but it talks about, playing. I read that as the riverfront and the attractions on the riverfront, and continuing, talking about new neighborhoods and providing a full range of quality housing. And so I kind of saw that there, but the transition was a little rough for me too.
Any other general high-level feedback or specific feedback? Mr. Liebig?
Going off of Commissioner Galvin's, I did read it the same way, live, work, and play. In the first paragraph, it's live and work. The second paragraph is play. I would simply just add a paragraph marker before the last sentence of the new development paragraph. So we're starting with the city will continue to have a strong and diverse economy. Just make that one sentence its own paragraph, and the very first sentence of the whole thing ties then your 3 paragraphs. But
Okay. Any other additions, edits, feedback?
I'd agree with Mr. Liebig on that part, because that was the part I was missing, just to show that a commitment to a strong economy. I was going to add, but I won't do that after Mr. Morosini, but just to add a sentence that by through attracting new jobs and new, that sort of sentiment, but again, it's not a need to have. The one thing that just kind of, and I read it, I wanted to focus on, because I think the sentence is in the first sentence of the second paragraph. New development, redevelopment will create new neighborhoods, so on and so forth. And I just have this thing where it tends to focus in on, that the focus is that on new development, redevelopment. And in fact, I think the focus is we're trying to create really new, cool neighborhoods or new, vibrant neighborhoods through new development and redevelopment. I think that's our goal, is to create great neighborhoods through redevelopment and new development. It's not new development. It's just a slight word change that I think puts the focus that I think we are at. I think we're trying to do that in the city. We're just not doing new development and redevelopment for its own sake. We're trying to create neighborhoods, and we're using those as a basis to do that. It's just a simple sentiment that I think reflects better what we're trying to do, at least in my opinion. That's all I have.
Any other comments, feedback? Actually, those were all, I think, really good, helpful comments. So this was probably the most painless editing by committee I've ever engaged in. Hopefully you feel that way, Mr. Ricola, as well.
Last
Thank you.
item on the agenda.
No, but thank you for actually attempting. I know we gave you a task to tighten something up, and I think by all accounts, I think you did really well with that, and just a few extra suggestions from the group. So I think that concludes item number 11. Informal discussion. Any?
I do have one
Mr.
item.
Ledesma.
Thank you. I just need to inform you, Madam Chair, and staff that I will not be in attendance. I think our next meeting is on the 15th, correct?
Right, on
Yeah, I
Tuesday.
will. I'm sorry. I had to book travel this week and could not get a flight home before 7 o'clock. So I will.
We'll miss
be
you.
missing.
Thank
No,
you for letting
won't,
us
but,
know.
Thank you.
Any other comment? And if not, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn in a second.
motion to observe.
Second?
I'll second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. See you, most of you, April 15th.